Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the GTX 1650 Super. More specifically, it's the Dell 1650 Super, one of the more plain cards in terms of design. We tested this as part of a system upgrade video a couple of weeks ago, but in that one the i7-4770S it was paired with meant the card was being held back a little bit in more CPU intensive titles. Today we'll be testing this as part of my i5-12400F system and letting this once excellent value budget card tap into its full potential. Launched in 2019, just 7 months after and $10 more than the standard 1650, which it absolutely destroyed by the way, the Super variant was just that, a super card for the price and one that could compete with the likes of the classic Nvidia 1060 and popular AMD 580, despite having what some said was a questionable amount of VRAM. Will 4GB of GDDR6 prove problematic today, or has the card aged gracefully over the last few years? Let's get into some games and find out if the 1650 Super is still a super budget choice. Cyberpunk 2077 recently got an FSR 2.1 update, which means we can drop the internal render quality for added performance without as much of a visual sacrifice. The thing is, we didn't actually need to use that today to hit 60 FPS on average. I went with the medium texture settings and medium crowd density settings while choosing the low preset from the graphics menu. The low preset doesn't switch everything to its lowest, so we had a mixture of settings that all in all made for a pretty solid experience, and I have to say this was a very welcome if not slightly surprising start. The card is staying within reasonable temps and also is very quiet under load. It boosts to 1890 MHz max, which is quite a bit higher than the on paper 1725 MHz speed. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 looks a bit choppy in this gameplay, but this was an issue with recording and it only happened with this footage. The game was actually very smooth to play, so ignore the fact it looks like a bit of a juddery mess. I wasn't sure what to do with the settings, so I started with everything at its lowest, but bumped the textures up to normal, selected high anti-aliasing quality and also chose SMAA T2X. High texture settings would have meant we exceeded the VRAM limit of the card according to the in-game metrics, so this is a good example where we may be limited a little bit with 4GB. Still, we could have chosen that option, but there may have been a few more performance hiccups. I could have probably gone a bit higher with the other settings as well, but I wanted to keep that 1% low above 60 frames per second as well here. Elden Ring is capped at 60 by default and I left it in place to avoid any issues, plus I didn't actually think the game would hit this cap with this card in the system. I don't know why, because even with the high preset it managed without any problems. The card is still very solid in terms of choices in 2022 based on what I've seen so far, and I wasn't expecting this level of performance from it. That goes for the previously tested games too, and spoiler alert for the following titles as well. It seems to be holding up as a very capable budget card. God of War with the original preset now, and once again we averaged over 60 FPS. This preset, from what I understand, is designed to match the visuals of the PS4 version of the game, though I think there are a couple of additional visual tweaks here and there. It still looks great, just as it does on console, but it performs a bit better here with a very solid average and decent percentile lows. The card is once again maxing out at around 70-71 degrees and boosting to almost 1900 MHz. The power metric is on screen too, and as you can see, this 100 watt card is being fully utilised. Mafia Definitive Edition is running at the high preset, which is the highest preset in this game. It can be quite demanding on more entry level cards, but the 1650 Super managed at least 60 FPS with solid percentile figures as well. I took a drive around the city just taking in the sights of this incredible remake of the original game, and I find myself replaying this one quite often. Something about it just makes it one of my favourite games available, and it's nice to see it performing so well for us here. Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered also benefits from FSR 2.1, but again, just like in Cyberpunk, it wasn't necessary to use here. I was even able to utilise the high preset and still get over 60 FPS with this thing, which is very impressive and once again quite surprising. I had to double check that FSR was actually disabled. I turned off ambient occlusion too, as it's one of the most intensive settings, but I probably didn't need to. You can't go wrong with one of these cards these days, but I have to say that you should consider the price of the 1060, 1660 and RX 580, as they might all be in a similar price bracket on the used market and will offer very similar or better performance. It's worth doing a bit of shopping around, as always. Red Dead Redemption 2 with the console equivalent settings as always now, and the card had no problem with hitting at least 60. We seem to be close to the maximum VRAM limitation here as well, but the performance doesn't seem to be suffering as a result. The percentile lows were good and the frame rate overall held very solid throughout my half-hour gameplay session. It's another excellent result from the resilient 1650 Super. Now Overwatch 2 would make more sense at low settings because I don't really think it looks that much different, and being an online competitive shooter, well, the more frames the better. That said, if you do want to play at ultra with a high frame rate, you can. As I said, I'd recommend probably medium or low, but with these settings and native 1080p, we weren't having any issues hitting over 100 FPS. Then again, it's probably not much of a surprise as it isn't the most intensive game, to say the least. I played a few different games on a few different maps and combined the figures to get this average. And more often than not, we will be seeing way over 100 FPS every single time. Pretty much all the time, to be honest, with similar 1.1% lows. To finalise, we have GTA Online, another game where I could have boosted the settings up higher, but I didn't really feel the need to, as the visual differences are minimal between high and very high. Because I stuck with high, I was able to make use of MSAA as well to alleviate some of those pesky jagged edges that are still visible with FXAA. The population density and other sliders were also set to max, but advanced options were all off. This is an older game of course, but it's still very popular, so I included it anyway. Now once again, we're getting pretty close to that 4GB VRAM limit, but there are no performance issues to report. Overall then, the GTX 1650 Super is a solid card even still, and perhaps one that could be a little bit overlooked, especially if there are other similar priced options on the market and ones that are equal in performance or slightly better, such as the 1060, RX 580 and GTX 1660, whether that's 1660 Supers, TIs or just the standard card. They also have more VRAM as well, so they might be a better choice, especially in the long run, and you might find that the performance is more noticeable in those games that demand more VRAM, such as Red Dead and GTA Online, while potentially not being that much more expensive, if at all, where you live. The GTX 1650 Super then, if you've enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you still have one of these cards and how well it performs for you, of course. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.